Annie Turnbo Malone is one of the most important entrepreneurs in American history. Yet her name has been largely erased from the stories we tell about success, wealth, and black achievement. She was a black woman born into slavery's shadow, orphaned by disease and denied the most basic education because of her race and her gender. And yet, by the 1920s, she had become a millionaire, possibly the first black female millionaire in the United States decades before Madam C.J. Walker received that same recognition. Her story is not just about hair care or cosmetics. It is about a woman who turned poverty into power, who built a factory and a school and a legacy when the law and society were both designed to crush her. To tell her story is to restore a missing chapter of American history. Annie Minerva Turnbo was born on August 9th, 1869, in Metropolis, Illinois. Her parents had been enslaved in Kentucky before the Civil War, and they had escaped across the Ohio River to freedom. Annie was the 10th of 11 children. When she was still very young, her father joined the Union Army and never returned. Then, when Annie was just a child, yellow fever swept through her town. Her mother and several of her siblings died. Annie was sent to live with her older sister in Peoria, Illinois. She was an orphan now, but she was not broken. In Peoria, Annie attended school whenever she could, but she was frequently forced to stay home because of illness. The absences piled up, and eventually she had to drop out. She never completed high school, yet she had a mind that could not be stopped. She was fascinated by chemistry. She watched her sister wash and style hair using harsh soaps and heavy greases that damaged the scalp and broke the hair. Annie saw a problem that no one else was solving. Black women had no safe, healthy products for their hair. She began experimenting in her small kitchen, mixing natural ingredients, testing formulas on her own hair, then on her sister's hair, then on the hair of neighbors. She did not have a laboratory. She had a stove, a few pots, and an obsession. By 1,900. Annie had created a line of hair care products specifically designed for black women. She called her first major product a wonderful hair grower, and it was exactly that. A treatment that nourished the scalp, repaired damage, and encouraged healthy growth. She did not have money for advertising, so she began selling door to door. She would walk through black neighborhoods in Peoria, knocking on doors, demonstrating her products on willing customers. Women saw the results with their own eyes. Their hair stopped breaking. Their scalps stopped itching. Their daughters stopped crying during wash days. Word spread quickly, not through newspapers or radio, but through the most powerful network. In Black America, the church, the beauty parlor, and the kitchen table. The move to love and the birth of an empire in 1902. Annie Turnbo married a man named Mr. Pope, but the marriage did not last. She kept her maiden name professionally, a decision that was almost unheard of for a black woman at the time. Then, in 1903, she made a decision that would change everything. She moved to St. Louis, Missouri, a city that was hosting the 1904 World's Fair. Millions of people would pass through St. Louis that year, including thousands of black women from across the country. Annie set up a booth at the fair and demonstrated her products to a national audience. It was a masterstroke. Within months, her mail orders exploded. She could not keep up with demand. Annie needed help, so she did something revolutionary. She began training other black women to sell her products. She taught them how to use the hair treatments, how to style hair, how to run their own small businesses. These women were called Poro agents, named after a West African word for an organization dedicated to physical and spiritual growth. The Poro agents would go door to door, just as Annie had done, building a network of thousands of saleswomen across the country. For many of these women, selling Poro products was the first paying job they had ever had. It was the first time they had earned their own money, controlled their own schedules, and felt a sense of dignity and purpose. Annie Turnbo Malone did not just sell hair products. She created an economic ecosystem for black women at a time when most jobs were closed to them. In 1980, Annie moved her growing enterprise to Chicago, purchasing a sprawling complex on South Parkway that became the headquarters of Poro College. It was not just a factory or an office, it was a campus. The Poro College complex included a manufacturing plant, a beauty school, a business training center, a restaurant, an auditorium, a chapel, and even dormitories for the young women who came from across the country to study. At its peak, Poro College employed nearly 200 people and trained over 75,000 agents worldwide. Annie Turnbo Malone had built the most successful black-owned business in America, and she had done it without a single dollar of outside investment, without a single bank loan, and without any help from a society that had told her she did not belong. The Madam C.J. Walker question. No story of Annie Turnbo Malone is complete without addressing the complicated relationship between her and Madam J. Walker, the woman most Americans recognize as the first black female millionaire. The truth is that Annie Turnbo Malone came first. She developed her products before Walker entered the industry. She trained Walker, who worked briefly as a Poro agent before leaving, to start her own competing line. The two women became rivals, and for decades, historians have debated who truly invented the black hair care industry. The most honest answer is that both women were geniuses, but Annie Turnbo Malone built the template first. She was the pioneer. Walker was the brilliant marketer who scaled the idea to even greater fame. There's room to honor both. But the erasure of Annie Turnbo Malone from popular history is a tragedy. She was not a household name in her own lifetime, partly because she was quiet and reserved, partly because she refused to engage in the kind of self-promotion that made Walker famous, and partly because the world was not ready to celebrate a dark-skinned, orphaned, high school dropout black woman as a millionaire. She was too black, too poor, too female for the newspapers of her day. And so they wrote about Walker instead, and the world forgot Annie Dot, the generosity that cost her everything. Annie Turnbo Malone was not just a businesswoman. She was one of the great philanthropists of her era. She gave away enormous sums of money to black causes, often anonymously. She donated to the NAACP, to the Tuskegee Institute, to the Urban League, and to dozens of churches and schools. During the Great Depression, when her own business was struggling, she continued to pay her employees and provide free meals to the hungry. She funded the construction of the St. Louis-colored YMCA, one of the first in the nation. She donated to Howard University Medical School. She supported orphanages and old folks' homes. She believed that wealth was a tool for liberation, not a trophy for personal pleasure. Her greatest act of generosity may have been her work with the St. Louis-colored Orphans Home, later renamed the Annie Malone Children and Family Service Center. For decades, she served as the home's president and primary financial supporter. She paid off its debts, funded its expansion, and personally cared for dozens of children who had no one else. She treated each child as her own. When people asked why she gave so much, she said simply, "I am helping my people." But her generosity also made her vulnerable. In the 1920s, her estranged husband filed for divorce and demanded half of her fortune. The legal battle dragged on for years, draining her finances and consuming her energy. She eventually settled, but the damage was done. Then, in the 1930s, the Internal Revenue Service launched an investigation into her business, claiming she owed back taxes. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. Annie won, but the legal fees and the negative publicity hurt her company. Then came the Great Depression, then World War II, then a changing beauty industry that favored new products. And new names. By the 1950s, Poro was a shadow of its former self. The slow fade and the quiet death. Annie Turnbo Malone spent her final years in Chicago, living quietly in an apartment above a drugstore. She had once owned $1 million empire. Now she lived modestly, surrounded by photographs of the thousands of women she had trained and the children she had saved. She died on May 10th, 1957, at the age of 87. Her obituary in the Chicago Tribune was brief. The New York Times did not run one at all. The world had moved on and the world had forgotten. But the women she trained did not forget. The children she saved did not forget. The thousands of black families who ate because Annie Turnbo Malone gave them jobs did not forget. And slowly, over the past few decades, historians have begun to restore her name. A center in St. Louis still bears her name. Scholars write about her in books and journals. Entrepreneurs cite her as an inspiration. And every black woman who starts a business from her kitchen, mixing formulas and knocking on doors, walks in the footsteps of Annie Turnbo Malone. Whether she knows it or not, the lesson of Annie Turnbo Malone, the story of Annie Turnbo Malone, is not about hair. It is about the audacity of a young orphan who looked at her reflection in a cracked mirror and decided that she was worth something. It is about a woman who built $1 million company without banks, without lawyers, without investors, without a high school diploma, and without the permission of a society that believed she was invisible. She did not seek fame. She did not seek credit.